In this video, I'm going to show you how to build this rocket in Blender 3D using Blender Cycles and a template file that has all the settings for the world preset. If we look at the 3D model, it's pretty basic. It's mostly made up of primitive shapes, slightly distorted, mostly spheres. The demo file you will download will not have this rocket in it, but it will have all the associated materials. So you can take those materials and apply them to anything you would like, and then modify those materials or duplicate the materials to make clones and change the color settings. To start, we're going to stay in object mode. We're going to go to the Create tab, and we're going to choose UV Sphere. This will create a sphere. To move an object in 3D, you'll notice there's 3 arrows. These will move an object on an axis throughout the 3D space, X, Y, or Z. This arrow shows because the arrow button in the bottom is selected. If you select the next option, you can rotate, and the last option will scale. If you accidentally click this button, it will hide those 3 options, but you can get them back just by clicking it again. So I'm going to move this kind of to the center of the screen. I'm going to select scale, and I'm just going to stretch this out a little bit to create a fuselage. That easy for this. To move into 3D, all I am doing is pressing in the wheel on my 3-button mouse. I have left click, right click, and the mouse wheel in the middle. If I press in that wheel, I can move around freely by holding that in when my mouse is over the 3D space, and when I let go, my view is set. You can also go to View, and there are several view options. Now notice there's 2 view menus, so select the top one in the bottom left, and there's different views that can be selected, preset ones that match each axis, which is great when you're modeling. You can also zoom in and out. You can do this by rolling the mouse wheel forwards and backwards in 3D space, or selecting zoom in or zoom out from the navigation submenu. And this is all under the view menu. Now I want to create a cockpit window. And to do this, I want to add a frame with some bolts and then a glass dome. So that is multiple shapes, but they're all spheres. So you can either select UV sphere from the Create menu, or you could go to Tools and choose Duplicate, and you can actually clone other items. I select objects by right-clicking, and when I select one, I can choose to duplicate. Now that I added too many for this example, I'm going to delete some, which is also from the Tools menu. There's the Delete button. And I'm just going to leave the second one that was created. I want to align my view to the left. And I'm going to place this sphere somewhat in the middle. And then I'm going to go to View and choose Top. And you can see that it's placed over the other sphere. It's important to check multiple views when working in 3D because you need to make sure things look correct from 3 angles. If this was up here and I was in the top view, it looks the exact same as when it was down here. So it's important to constantly look at the front, the side, the top, the bottom, and just kind of align everything within those 3 axes. Now I'm going to stretch this out. So with it being selected, it's orange. If it wasn't, I would just right click it and you'll see the orange border. I'm going to go to the top view, use the scale feature. I'm going to stretch this a little bit, but I don't want it to be as long. I don't want it to be the exact same shape. And I can even offset it a little bit. Now be creative. They all don't have to look the same. Everyone's rocket will look different. I'm then going to squish this down. I went to the left view. Actually, technically right view. Now I'm going to use the rotate tool. I'm only shifting it a little bit. And I'm going to set this inside the rocket a little bit. So this is not the window, but this is the frame to the window. Now I'm going to duplicate this. And I'm going to stretch this out. Shrink it in a little bit. And as mentioned, you have to look at every single view to make sure things are looking correct. And now I'm going to select the translate, the move option with the arrows. I'm going to push this down. Now I'm just going to freely spin around. I'm pretty happy with this, but if you look at all the different angles, you see it's not quite centered. So I can adjust that, and then I'm going to squish it in a little more, just so the space around it is pretty even. So right now we just have 3 ellipses, and they're looking pretty cool. Now I would like to make some bolts that go around the frame of the window, around the dome that is above the cockpit. So to do that, I can go to Create. And remember, this is for fun, this is your own invention, so it doesn't necessarily have to be just more spheres. You could even use the torus, which basically I like to call it a donut. You can scale it down. If you notice, my scale right now doesn't have those little squares. The way you can achieve that, instead of squishing things and trying to get it to look the same as it did, which could be difficult, you can go to the Tools menu, up in the top left, and choose the Scale option. This does a uniform scale. Uniform meaning that it stays even. The aspect ratio, the dimensions, they don't shift. And now I'm going to place this on one axis right along the frame. But you'll see it doesn't show because the perspective, it's below it. So I can bring that up. This is where I want to align my view to the side again. The way I zoom in super fast is I go to View, I go to Align View, and let's see. The shortcut is number pad 0. Here it is. No, that's not it. Let's see. Number pad period is what I meant to say. It's the number pad period. Here, no. Ah, okay, I see. So they don't have it listed with the shortcut. But if you go to the View menu, go to Align View, and choose View Selected, this will zoom you in to whatever has the orange border around it currently. And it will try to get it to fit as close as possible to the 3D view for you to see, but making sure it stays within the screen, which is really useful. So now I'm going to go to the left view, and you'll notice that you can kind of see through stuff. If you don't want that to happen, just select View, Perspective, Ortho, or number pad 5. That makes life a little bit easier. Now I click the Rotate option, and I'm just going to place these around. These are just some small details. So I'm going to duplicate, and after we do a few together, I think you will be able to do this on your own. Now you'll notice this is a good opportunity to show other tools within the Rotate tool belt. Since this is curved, the frame, using the regular Rotate, the options with the axes might not work the best. So if you use your free Rotate of the 3D view by pushing in the mouse wheel, you can select Rotate under Transform, and you'll see that it rotates based on where you're looking, not on the axes, which this can be pretty useful. And then I can move this by selecting the arrow and positioning it, or I can use the Translate tool up here, which again works based on your perspective and mouse movements more so than the axes. So now I'm going to move a little quicker using keyboard shortcuts, pressing the R key for rotate. It's harder to remember to use the shortcut sometimes, but I think you know where the options are now. So just remember, you don't have to use keyboard shortcuts, but you can if you'd like. And what I'm about to do next is a little more of an advanced feature. I'm going to just finish up. Let's see, I want to select 3 items at once. So I do that by right-clicking, holding down Shift, and I have 3 selected now. If I go to duplicate, these also can get duplicated. I'm just going to move them over here. And there is an option we haven't discussed yet called Mirror. Mirror actually allows you to flip things. So if I click on Mirror, you'll see my orange borders on the selected objects turned white. What it is waiting for now is for me to press X, Y, or Z. If you look in the bottom left where it normally says View, you'll see it says Select a Mirror Axis. So I selected Y, which I think is the correct one, which I think it might not be. Well, let's move these out a little further. So I'm going to click on Mirror. Let's see. I'm going to do it again. I think I need to be on this angle. Oh, I think they're mirroring based on their individual origins. So don't worry about that feature so much, but just know it's there and you can use it to flip things. I'm just going to rotate it. There you go. So not to waste too much time within this video, you get the idea of how to add these, and you can add them around the entire frame, or you can add other objects like spheres or cubes just for a little extra detail. Next, I'm going to duplicate the fuselage, or you can go to create and choose a new sphere. I'm going to just duplicate this. Now I'm going to rotate it. I'm going to go to a different perspective, and I'm going to flatten it. These will be the wings. If edit mode gets complicated, these wings look decent enough and they're pretty cool. They'll still look great in a 3D render. If you want something a little more unique, we're going to go into edit mode. Inside of edit mode, and remember, anything that is too complicated, you can leave out until you practice it more. And you can also practice things in other Blender files before you modify your rocket if you're scared of making a mistake. It's definitely the best way to learn, by practicing. So to go to edit mode, it's down here. We select this menu option, it will pop up, and edit mode is somewhere around here. Edit mode allows you to morph a single object. Object mode lets you position objects and select any object, move them as groups, move them individually. Picture edit mode being like having a bunch of raw ingredients and cooking. You're able to modify the actual food before it's created. Object mode, picture it like a bakery full of different items already made. You can move them, but you can't change them. They're already made. Another way to think of it is with carpentry. Object mode is like furniture in your house. You can move it around. But edit mode lets you be the carpenter and really design and change an object. So now we're going to right click on one of these dots. You see how they change to orange? That means they're selected. So in object mode we select objects. In edit mode we can select vertices. And if I go to move these, you can see that you can actually change the object. So down below you can see there's vertice select, edge select, and face select. Vertice is selected by default. It's basically just a dot, the points that make up the lines. An edge is created by two connected points or vertices, and a face is three or more vertices, all with edges that is filled in. Down below we have faces that have four vertices. All of them function similar. You can select a mode, right click a vertex, an edge, or a face, and you can pull them around. When you do face select, you just automatically select all four vertices at once for a face. Makes editing a little bit easier. Over to the right, this is enabled by default in the template file, but it's not if you start a new Blender file. This is proportional editing, and essentially it allows you to apply a radius to what you're morphing. If you're pulling out a vertex from a 3D mesh and you have this option selected, you'll notice a white circle appears that allow you to move more than one at a time. By only moving one, it has a radius of effect. like its own gravitational field, pulling the other vertices with it. While that may sound confusing, it's really easy in application. So let's start from the beginning. I have an object selected. I go to edit mode. Vertices select is on by default. And here, this is enabled. Now when I go to move something, you see a white circle. Without this enabled, it only grabs that single point and you see it, the difference. So now that you know how to do that, if we enable this again, and we begin pulling one of these, if I roll my mouse wheel, the 3-button mouse, the wheel in the middle, if I roll that back and forth, you see the white circle gets bigger and smaller. And you can actually, just with one vertex selected, push this, let go, and it will commit. You have a lot cooler looking wing now than if you just used a flattened sphere. I can go back to object mode. I'm going to go to top view, and I can insert this. And at this point, it's small details. I'm going to duplicate this again. This time I'm going to shrink it a little bit more. I'm going to rotate it. And now I'm going to use this as like a bottom fin, just to make it look cool. You can be as creative as you want with what you're building. Now I'm going to duplicate it again. And I'm just rotating it. You can tell it's a little off center. So you have to fix that. You can just physically move each one as needed. And now to create a rocket thruster, I'm going to go to create, choose a torus, and I'm going to go to the scale down in the bottom, the one where you left click and drag to modify. And that looks pretty decent. I'm going to make it a little bit longer. And now I'm going to go to circle, and I'm going to add in a circle and choose fill type. Choose N-gon or triangle fan, it doesn't matter. If you're modifying it, it will matter, but we're leaving it just as a circle. And we're going to position this inside of here, and then we're going to duplicate it, and we're going to put the other one down below. Now I'm going to select multiple objects by holding in shift and right clicking. You can see they move together. I'm going to use the rotate tool to rotate it. Then I'm going to go to tools, scale, and I want to do a uniform scale. I'm going to duplicate, I'm going to scale, and then again I'm going to duplicate this larger one. Okay, I think we're almost complete with the modeling aspect. If we look through our camera, we can see it looks pretty cool. And if we render this image, It's looking a lot like a rocket ship now. We're still missing the colors, materials, we're missing smooth shading, and some finer details like the work around the frame by the window. So let's start with the modifiers. If you look at the render, which I'll show you how to render there in the end of this video, you'll notice you see a lot of little squares just like this. Those are the faces. The computer is not calculating them to be smooth. So to fix that, we just go over to the Tools option, Shade and Smooth. Flat and Smooth does exactly what it sounds like. But we'll notice it's still a little weird on the ends. This is where I would like to introduce modifiers. So we used smooth shading, and that fixed this, but you'll notice there's still some harsh edges, and the lighting is kind of distorted. That's because there's not enough faces, there's not enough data. So if we go over to this wrench, this is where we get modifiers. So I'm going to make this flat again so you can see what the modifier does. Select the wrench. When you add a modifier, it only applies to the active object, the one highlighted in orange. From the drop-down, I can choose any modifier I want, but the one I want for this specifically is subdivision surface. The modifiers I find useful are subdivision surface, solidify, and bevel in my daily editing. And when I do more advanced things, I like to use Boolean, which allows you to use one object to cut holes in another or join them together. And I like to use multi-resolution, as this is useful when you 3D sculpt. All of these modifiers are extremely useful, depending on what you're using Blender for. So since we want to just add more detail to this sphere, we're going to use subdivision surface. You can see that this just adds more detail and it smooths out as it goes. So now when I do smooth shading, it looks super smooth. There's two options within this that you need to pay attention to: view and render. The view is the 3D space. The render is the final image. 2 is okay here. Technically 2 is okay here. But you can offset them. Like if you want your final output to look great, you can do 0 in this view, but 2 or 3 over here. It's still going to come out super smooth in the 3D render, but it's not going to take too long to calculate for you, which is the beautiful thing. That is really helpful because it doesn't add too much load to the computer while you're working. So I'm going to do that several times now. For each sphere, I want to look better. And even the thrusters, we can do this too. Remember, the more of this you do, the longer the render time. So if you find your computer's going too slow, you can tone down the amount of smoothness, the amount of subdivisions, I mean. Maybe not everything needs that modifier. I have a gaming computer, it works pretty well. So adjust what you're doing according to your own computer hardware. It's looking a lot cooler already. These are such a small detail, I don't think anyone would be close enough to notice lack of detail. So I think these are safe just to do smooth shading. Okay, so the next thing that I think we need to do, now that we have done edit mode, object mode, added modifiers, and morphed and positioned different items, is materials. As you can see, this is pretty boring looking. So right click on any object. I'm going to start with the fuselage. The Blender file that came with this video, or that you downloaded, has a bunch of materials specifically for a rocket ship. Once you right click an object and you see that it's orange, you know which one's selected. You can click on this red sphere and this will show you the materials for that object. If you see this where it says new, just click new and that's okay. You can create your own. Or from the drop down, you can select some of the pre-created options. So I'm going to choose metal glossy and I'm going to render this again so you can see what that looks like. Alright, so you can see how cool that looks. Now, if you don't like the color, I think it's important that you know how to change colors. Blender's materials are a little more complicated than probably some programs you've used before. But basically, this is the section you need to worry about in most of these materials. Mix just means there's two options put together. So there's what they call shaders. Just picture two boxes here. And within here, the glossy effect is a light purpley pink. And this effect, which is similar to like a metal frying pan, that like the light kind of makes some cool patterns on it, like it looks like a line going across. This is set to purple. You'll also notice there's roughness. Roughness matters. The higher the roughness, the less reflective, the less mirror-like the object becomes. If you put roughness all the way up, it looks like a painted wall that's just a very solid, flat, matte color. If you put it all the way down, it becomes super reflective, like a perfectly polished mirror. So let's change these and let's see how it comes out. For glossy, I'm going to change this to let's do a green, like a light green. And I'm going to change this one to like a darker, well not darker green, but like a more green. I don't know if that makes sense. More saturation. More green saturation within the color. And you'll see how that changes. If I were to change the glossy color, you'll see that the reflection is really red. I like when glossy is closer to a white color because it's more accurate in my opinion. If you do pick a color that's not green, I'd pick something adjacent like yellow or a blue, and you can get some cool effects. For me personally, I don't love the green as much as I thought initially, because I think out of space, I think more of like a space kind of has a bluish purple hue to it to begin with. So maybe an orange or a blue. Let's try this. But I think at this point you get how to change this particular material. Now, if you give another object the same material, but you want to look different, make sure you clone it. So from the drop down, I right click this wing, and then from the drop down select metal glossy. Now if you look at this, they both have the same color. If I think because I'm only selecting this one I can change the color without affecting the other one, I'm mistaken. I'm wrong. The reason is all of these objects are looking at metal glossy. Metal glossy is universal. If you've done web design, it's like a style sheet. It applies to everything that has metal glossy associated with it. So what you need to do is you need to, on one of the objects that both have metal glossy, I'm going to choose the wing since they were second, click on this plus sign. This duplicates it. If I click on this plus sign, you'll see it says 0.001. So now I can just rename this metal glossy wing, and you'll see metal glossy. Now I can freely edit this. The next thing I want to do is I'm going to take the frame and I'm going to give it the chrome material. Down below these items, I'm going to select and I'm going to give it chrome ring ripples. And I'm also going to give these chrome. Now, the circles we added in, you might say, well, why did we add these circles? What's the purpose? I'm going to give it a special material. This one is named Green Glow. It's Emission. It's like a light source. It will look like thrusters. And we have 2 green circles on each thruster because you can do the same to the back. So no matter which way you're making your picture or animation, it will look decent. Now I'm going to select the cockpit window and I'm going to choose glass. Now I'm going to render this again, and you can see it's coming out pretty cool. I think at this point you're ready to build your own. I'm going to finish mine in this video just so you can see the whole process. At the end of the video, I'm going to explain all the settings that exist in the template. So in case you ever go to make your own file from scratch, you can do so. Just to talk over as I'm editing, you'll notice that I use multiple views as I go, and I'm constantly correcting mistakes. And that's okay. Things won't look perfect the first time you place them typically. It's just a lot of trial and error on some of these little tasks. As you get better in Blender, you'll find there's ways you can actually use vector paths, similar to what you've done in PowerPoint for drawing, to create places where these will show up automatically. But that gets into a lot of advanced menus. Just know there are easier ways as you learn more, but those ways sometimes are really complicated. So I'm holding down Shift and I'm right clicking. And I basically selected them all. I'm going to unselect. Let me start again. I just right click, I let go of Shift. Now I can start again. I don't want to select the first and last one, so I only want to duplicate the ones that are not on the edges. So now I'm going to do, and this one might be okay. Shift D, or duplicate over here. Now I'm going to rotate. Ah, so the reason why that's happening is the angle. So we can just rotate this upwards. And again, you got to get multiple perspectives as you go around. Um, if I was building this as my first rocket, I would take a lot of care for these details. With it being a demo file, I think this looks appropriate. Okay, so to render. Rendering is the process when the computer outputs a final image or series of images. The computer will take the light source into account, the camera position, camera settings, kinds of materials, the shapes, everything. And what it does is it bounces light into the scene just like real life, and light will reflect off other items. It basically emulates how life actually works when light, fills a room, how shadows are created, all this. The computer calculates this for us, which is really nice of it because it sounds complicated. Um, so to do this, there is a few ways. First way that is, well, I'll just show you both at the same time. There's a render menu, and there's a render icon over here. So from the render menu, you just go to render, render image, or you can press F12 on your keyboard. If it's taken too long or you noticed a mistake, you can hit this little X to stop, or you can hit the escape key on your keyboard. Now you'll notice you're stuck in this view. Just press the escape key on your keyboard again, and you'll go back, or you can go here and choose 3D view, down the bottom left. So either of those work. I prefer pressing the escape key. The other way to render is from here. This icon is for rendering. You can click on this render button. And both work. The exact same, actually. So either way works perfectly fine. Now I'm going to go around and give these materials, I'm going to make them all chrome. Oops. Control Z undoes just like every program. That's a very useful tip. Okay, so all the ones facing the camera I edited just for the sake of time. Now if I render this again, you'll see that it keeps looking better and better the more we do to it. I feel like it's lacking. I think I can definitely add more to it. So I want to add in an antenna and maybe some fins in the back and a whole bunch of things. So I'm going to do that now. I'm going to make these, let's see. I'm going to make this that blue color. If you decide it's confusing that they're both purple, way down the bottom, you can change the color it shows up as in the viewport, under viewport color. It's not necessary to do that. That does not affect the final output. Okay, so I'm going to duplicate, I'm going to rotate, duplicate, rotate, duplicate, rotate. That looks pretty cool. Next, I'm going to duplicate the fuselage, shrink it down, stretch it. I will, what might look cool? If the glass is duplicated. Yeah, a lot of really cool results just by modifying existing objects. It's a really good technique. I think that looks a lot cooler already. Okay, once you have your final image, which I think this could be considered a final image, you go to View. Oh no, don't go to View. Go to Image. Go to Save as Image. Choose a place you want to save it. Desktop and My Documents are right on the left. And I'm going to call this Hall of Fame 1, as this might be the new standard for Blender 3D graphics. To cover how this file was set up, I'm going to show you a few options. If you're happy with where you are and don't want to get confused, it's okay to cut off here. If you are curious how we have the space background or how to change other settings, continue watching. The first thing I will show you is the space background, which is super confusing but awesome. So under this menu where it says default, if you click here, a whole list of stuff's going to appear. It's a can of worms. Blender has so many different features. They have different menu setups for everything. If you get lost, your original was default. We want to go to compositing right above default. A render is just an image. This image has a transparent background by the way we set it up. This is called, it's nodes, and it's you can mix nodes to add effects to images. So we load an image with an image node. We have a render layer node, which is what Blender outputs the 3D file. We mix them with an alpha over. Alpha means see-through. We then add a fog glow, which gives us those glow effects around the lights. And after that, we do a glare with streaks, which gives us those like lines coming out of the glow. So these are both technically glare. One is a fog glow, one is streaks. And then we mix, it's all mixed together, and the composite is the final image. So if I were to remove this space background, you see you get nothing. Basically, this is just taking a see-through image, which I can just put this straight to here. That grid in the background, that checkerboard pattern, means it's see-through. That's typical of photo editing programs. And I can mix these together. Oops. Oh, the reason it's not showing up is this has to be connected. There we go. You just left click and you can connect these with wires. If I bypass the fog glows, you see it's not as epic looking. And that's how the space background gets there in some of those glow effects. Blender Cycles up top is the render engine. Blender typically starts out in Blender Render, but we choose Blender Cycles. That's another setting that was used. Going back to the default view, under the camera settings, we chose, this is default 50% of 1920 by 1080. It's half of an HD TV. This is a good resolution for a website or even a video. It's not too low, but it saves time on rendering. Under sampling, I modified a few things for this template. These got turned down significantly. I think they were 32 and 128. I turned them both down to 8, which is really low in terms of rendering. If you want a higher quality image, just bump those numbers up. The render one is the one that matters. The preview is just when you test how something looks. Clamp removes some of the light in the scene. It makes it more biased. All that means is it looks a little faker, but it renders better. As we scroll down, this is another section modified. Reflective caustics and refractive caustics. This is just like when light hits glass or metal or something, how the light passes through it or bounces off of it. We disabled those, and we filtered glossy by 10, which means that it's less realistic, but it saves time. It looks better faster, essentially. And these got, I think I turned these, no, these I think are default. You can turn these down at your own discretion to test things. Just take a screenshot of where they are. To get the rocket on a see-through background, I check off transparent here. That works for that. And finally, I left it on CPU rendering, so I increased the size of the tiles. And I also, I didn't do anything here. This we could technically modify to try and make things go a little faster, but it's not going to make a huge difference. The final thing I did was under noise, under this menu, there's an option called Denoising. I'll show you what that does. So that's this menu here, next to the render menu, Denoising, and I left them as the default settings. Without denoising, your picture will render slightly faster, but you see how grainy it is? With denoising enabled, it gets rid of all those dots. The only other way to get rid of those dots is to increase the samples on the other menu, which I'll also show you. If we disable denoising and go over here, and if we bump this from 8 to say 64, you'll see it's going to take quite a bit longer to render, but it's going to look so much better. The settings on the template were to satisfy most computers. And if this is higher and you enable denoising, you get a much better image faster. Because denoising is more effective when it has more data to work with. You can see how it cleans up all the noise. Alright, excellent. So that's everything in the template for the setup. Now the materials. Let's show you another trick about the camera. If you do decide you want to move the camera, well, let's actually, yeah, you can hit, while in camera view, hit Shift F and it goes to fly mode. And you can kind of move around like Minecraft with WASD or the arrow keys to move in, out, left, right. Q and E go up and down, and the mouse looks. So if we get really close to here, this will give us a really good preview of how these materials look up close. You see that the paint on the rocket has a lot of depth to it. That's done with something called a normal map, a displacement map. So that's rendering. I'm going to go over to here. You'll see metal glossy. That's the one that is like the paint on the rocket. You can, let's see. I'll show you what this does, and then I'll create a new one like it. So a mix shader with glossy, and I will never pronounce this right, anisotropic. And then we just set the settings. This one has a roughness of 0.2, which means it's not mirror-like. It definitely has some roughness to it. And the one above has a roughness of 0.001, which means it's almost like a mirror. The bump texture that looks really 3D is down below. It's the displacement. Moose grave texture and the settings you can just look in this video to see. Those aren't the default settings, but basically I just sized it down so it was little, and then I made sure it wasn't too deep. Like By deep, I mean if I increase the detail, you'll see it immediately. It embosses it more. It makes it like as if it was higher up, and the shadows are way too harsh. So I just undid. Oh, I undid too much. But I undid that. Now, if I want to create something, well, actually, let's look at glass too. Glass is a mix shader. Glass and transparent. The IOR, I turned on a 0.5. That's the distortion the glass creates. Since this is a thin window, it shouldn't really distort much. Emission is literally just emission. Strength, I increased to 5 from 1 to make it stronger. This is similar to chrome, which is a mix shader. Chrome is up on the window, the frame, and the circles around it. But I added displacement. Magic texture was the option I selected, and that just created that ring-like effect. If I were to have a new object and I was going to add my own texture to it, not texture, but material. Let's say I do my subdivision surface, I do my smooth shading, and now I want this monkey to have a new material. If I render right now, we see that the monkey is just a gray nothing. If I click new, I can then select options. If I change the color first, you'll notice now it's green. Diffuse is the default. Where you really want to look is in surface. Click on this, choose a different option, change the settings. Get used to that first. Tune. This makes it look more like a cartoon. You see how it's different than the previous one? If I choose glossy, we'll see it's more reflective. If I change roughness down, that roughness option, you'll see this is like a mirror now. Which is cool, but what if I want to be like a mirror, but not as much like a mirror? So this is the basics of how you add in regular materials. Now, if I want to change this and I want to do a mix shader, instead of glossy, I can choose mix. And the mix shader gives me the option to have two other surfaces. So I can choose something like glossy with no roughness, and then I can choose something like diffuse, which is by nature really rough. This will be reflective, but it looks more like a porcelain than like a mirror. And you can see how you can mix these to get different effects. Displacement down below is a little more confusing. I recommend not looking at it too much, but if you're really curious and you want to try something advanced, try it out. If I select an option and render, you'll see now it has bump detail. Change the sliders on them, and you'll begin to see how to affect it. It's a little more complicated because you have a lot more varying menus. The shaders above have their own sliders, but displacement options begin to add more and more layers of features, I guess you could say. And with features comes confusion if you're new. But I do recommend once you get more advanced, look at displacement. It gives you a lot of options to add more detail. And that's the complete setup of this template file, I believe. I don't think I missed anything. Finally, I'm going to do a high resolution render at a full 1920 by 1080 with a much higher render samples. And with denoising, I'm going to turn it down a little bit. And I'm going to render that. And this will take a little bit longer, so I'm going to go get a drink. And when I come back, we should have a finished result. Okay, so it's still not finished. I could have got a sandwich while I was at it. Um, yeah, when you render, I highly recommend you plan to render when you're going out. So check with your parents. Make sure they feel comfortable with your computer being on if they're leaving the house. But I find it best to just set up a render, and leave, or do something else. Like if you have to do the dishes, set up a render, go do the dishes. If you have to run errands, if you're going with your parents somewhere, like to a grocery shop or something, set up the render, then leave. That will save you a lot of time sitting there waiting, and it's suspenseful because you know it's gonna look so cool, but you know it takes a long time with Blender cycles because it's so realistic. Ah, yes, perfect. An awkward error. I kind of like this by accident, so I'm gonna save this anyways. um, so the reason that happened was my image for the space background is only set to 50, like it is set to 960 by I think 540. Um, that means it's not big enough to fill the background. So if you do change these settings, you will have to go to compositing, go to the image option. You can close this, choose open, and find a different image that is the correct resolution. But this is pretty cool looking because it looks like it's flying out of the screen. That definitely would be cool as a laptop cover or something like that. And finally, if you do want to save something for your lab book where you don't want the background, you can choose, if your lab book background is white, you can choose a white background, file, save as, and name your file something more descriptive with your name and that it's a rocket. Um, so instead of doing alpha over, I can just do fog glow and streaks direct. This still applies the effects but leave it as a PNG. Save as. I'm going to call this 4. There we go. So now I can look at these files and you can see the different outputs. Um, and finally, you can bring this into Photoshop or the GIMP. You can do some really cool stuff with it. So if you think out of Blender is cool, if you're good with the photo editor, you can actually make this look a lot cooler. Um, this would be a different course in itself, I think, photo manipulation. But if you do have the interest, GIMP is extremely useful for free. And if you do have Photoshop, Photoshop is pretty useful too. Let's see. So you can see the stars are a little more visible in the background. Um, you can increase the highlights to make it glow more. And if you use the GIMP, there's similar features. And for now, I think this will be the end of this video. Um, more to come with more advanced features and some rendering options.